It's recording.
Okay, welcome to our bi-monthly lecture. This one is Loss and Grief. We're looking at fragmentation and resiliency. Um, Before we get going, I just wanted to make some announcements here. We've added a teaching manual, and as we go forward, we'll talk about elements of it. Um, Anger management communication solution is a very important part of our loss and grief program, and in terms of symbolic use, the use of shields becomes very important. And in our teaching book, we have on the table, we have like 3 shields from the Greco-Roman era. And then we have, of course, the trademark sign for anger management communication solution. And the reason that I kind of put the AMCS 3D moniker along with the shield is that it tends to serve the same kind of function. The shield for an army and for a soldier, hoplites, was very, very important. And I wanted to draw a parallel with my program called Anger Management Communication Solution and stressing the importance of language in managing loss. Again, the basis for this is communication. Communication is everything. With Anger Management Communication Solution, it tends to be a cognitive process based on language, where the shield is more tangible, more concrete. But when I get to that point in my lecture, I'll talk about the importance of that. One of the I'm reading a book by Charles Taylor, and when we're going to have to put these books up on the Charles Taylor on the language animal. We've had a series of these books, John. And I really want to give credit to where credit is due, because I think it's one of the most brilliant books I've ever read. I've said that from week to week, but it's just a very good book in terms of framing some of the issues for me. Anyway, getting back to the lecture at hand, loss and grief, fragmentation and resiliency. In assessing or looking at the essential architecture of loss and grief, speech and language are very, very critical. As human beings, speech is everything. Speech defines who we are. Speech is everything. In Anger Management Communication Solution in 3D, which stands for Anger Management Communication in 3D, we talk about the 3 Ds that are important in managing anger: diatribe, discussion, and dialogue. Again, all 3 forms of types of communication. Now, before we get going, I wanted to bring some questions or present some questions to you, and along the way, at the end of the lecture, we can maybe go back and take a look at these questions. The framing questions for this lecture. I want you to think of examples, and if you want to write on your handouts, you can. One of the things you should do is get a piece of pencil so people can make notes at time. Anyway, can you give examples of the following? Prosecutorial or depressive anxiety. We've talked about this again and again and again in our program. Fragmentation, resiliency, and the 4th question, can you give examples of power, natural power, and supernatural power? For review, we've had a series of lectures on language and the importance of speech. Again, speech and language defines us as human beings. Speech needs to begin to be acquired by age 5 in order for us to be fully sentient human beings. To be human is not just to exist, but to begin to act in being and becoming. Being and becoming. Human beings, when we start out without action, we're nothing, basically. And sometimes we are treated like nothing a lot of times, unless we specifically, intentionally decide to be something and becoming something else. And in so doing, we define ourselves. Again, speech and language are internalized thoughts. And when you look at a little baby, part of their autonomy is acquisition of speech. They love speech. Bobby wants a cracker, and they blah, 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 and the speech is meaningless. And in our protocols, we call that etic speech, ETIC, etic speech. And this is the beginning of the process of building an internalized space. Now, etic speech is very, very intimate speech. It's intimate speech for an infant. But somebody has to remind Donald Trump that he doesn't stop. You have to have it has to progress with social consciousness. It has to evolve. It can't all be this kind of discursive normalization, ethic speech. So types of speech. We look at functionality and utility of speech. Charles Taylor, I mentioned him in starting, talked about speech, and I'm beginning to look at that his work. And his frame I thought was very important to start with. He talks about language and the utility and the uses of language. He talks about language as inframing, which parallels and describes reality. One of the interesting points that he makes is that in the inframing aspect of speech is not essential for speech or language. It's more etic. It's random. Sometimes it's meaningless. It's just random naming things. Then the most important type of speech, in terms of creating an intimate space for ourselves, is called constitutive speech, having the power to establish or to enact. Constitutive speech, having the power to establish or to enact. It's essential in making a thing what it is. It's essential in something being and becoming. Again, recovery from loss, managing anger requires that we establish intimate spaces, which is dependent on language. Language, again, is everything. Language is everything because of the way we frame what we're experiencing. Now, in terms of recovery and language, recovery requires an emerging consciousness to establish those intimate spaces we talk about. That consciousness is defined by action as facilitated by choice in being and becoming. And in so doing, we emerge from this sense of nothingness. Jean-Paul Sartre stuff, I love it. Again, just existing is nothing. You need action, and your action must be framed by a choice. And sometimes our choices are not very well informed. But it's our choices nevertheless. So when Donald Trump says that Obama was not born in America, and something like about 60% of certain Republicans believe it, that is an example of etic speech. It's meaningless, it's nonsense. We know it's nonsense. But there's where the social consciousness is about. It's about power unto death. It's about acquiring power. It's diminishing somebody else. It's limiting somebody else. It's leveling somebody else, leveling our president. And if that's what we're engaged in, that's one way you can do it. Now, again, speech needs to progress. It needs to progress from etic speech, ETIC speech, to eidostic speech, to eidetic speech. And each progression parallels a kind of level of conscious development. Now, consciousness, speech as representation. Speech as representation. When you look at how somebody speaks, it kind of gives you some clues to their level of conscious development and progression. Again, kids started with inframing speech, discursive normalization, and naming things. It's like running through the house and saying, this is a room, this is a kitchen. And a lot of times you just say, well, what is this, Mom? This is a bedroom. This is a that. It's naming. But you don't have any sense of what the function of that room is. It's etic. It's meaningless. It's just inframing. It's a chance for you to begin to name things and to label them. Then you go, again, it's etic speech, it's discursive normalization, it's just naming, it's exploring the house and naming things randomly. Constitutive speech is eidostic speech, which reflects one's culture. Eidostic, E-I-D-O-S-T-I-C speech, which reflects one's culture. So, if you're in a salon, it's a middle class, kind of a bourgeois experience to have a home with a salon. Yeah. And so that reflects your culture. That's an example of eidostic speech. Eidetic speech is reflective speech and looks at the intimacy of being and becoming. Again, it's very important to remember that everything is dependent on choice. You choose to believe what you're going to believe because it gives you a sense of your own power. You said? So I'm going to take off my suit, man. I'm hands-free now.
Burn it up.
So
making me hot.
I need to take off my suit.
It's warm in here.
It's too warm. Thank you. So, um, eidetic speech, again, reflects that intimate space of being and becoming. And at its highest level of conscious development is rational choice. It's that God piece, John. Yeah. But until we get to that place, we have to go through a series of levels of conscious development in progression. So, consciousness in being and becoming, consciousness in progression. You start out with mastery. You think of a child, trying to master certain things, taking a train and throwing it off, breaking it up, playing with it, trying to get mastery of language, mastery of objects. And then the second level of conscious development and progression is power unto death. You really want to really master this object. You can destroy it, you can tear it up, you can damage it. And you realize that you have the capacity to damage and destroy and even to kill this thing. And eventually that begins to bring up the issue of prosecutorial anxiety. It's the worst possible thing that can happen to you. It's the threat of death. It's the threat of becoming overwhelmed. And as a child, you run into a safe place, and you run to the safety of a relationship with a parent or with something that's culturally representative of a parent figure. And you develop the third level of conscious development, which is a master-slave relationship. And you develop depressive anxiety to manage the prosecutorial anxiety of that power unto death. Again, the key here is you develop relationships and you create aesthetic intimacy. That space. People love you, they take care of you, they value you. The fourth level of conscious development and progression is Stoicism. This is Hegel's stuff, by the way. This is Hegel's progression. And I adopt it freely and I love it. I just want to give credit for where it came from. So Stoicism is very important. Stoicism is acceptance. And I just love it when I'm dealing with some of my kids and I can see them at this level of conscious development where they say, my auntie is abusive, this person is abusive to me, but I can deal with it, I can take it. I can accept it. But there's no intimacy there. It's just acceptance. I'm accepting the fact that I have to be in a relationship with you. You have the power. I really don't have the power, but I'm going to play whatever role I need to play to keep that relationship going with you. So that's Stoicism. Again, it's the acceptance but without intimacy. The same intimacy you would have in a relationship you would develop with somebody else. Now, the fifth level of conscious development in being and becoming is skepticism. And I love to see this in my kids. When I begin to see skepticism, it's when you accept stuff, but you become a wise ass. I can do this, but what are you going to do about it? I'll do it, but there's a kind of playfulness and a fun part of it. It's the acceptance with intimacy. You're trying to infuse the relationship again with a certain level of intimacy. So you're skeptic. So when people say, well, he's a wise ass. Yeah, he's a wise ass, but it's a natural developmental stage. Skepticism. Level 6, the unhappy consciousness. Doing the right thing reluctantly. Yeah, this is the thing that God would want me to do. It's the unhappy consciousness. I will do what I got to do because I'm in a moral relationship with somebody. I care about them. That's what the society wants me to do. There's morality, there's ethics involved here, so I'll do what I got to do, man. Whatever. Reluctantly. And then the highest form of conscious development is rational choice. But I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Different people have looked at it. Kohlberg has looked at it, and he's talked about it. All of us have talked about it and looked at it. But it's rational choice. The key here is choice. It's about freedom. It's about what God gave us. Even those people who are making the statement that Obama was born in Kenya, it's a choice. And it's a choice based on their level of conscious development, which is power unto death. To deny this man who he is to be nihilistic and destructive. It's not to have a relationship with this man. No, he's our president. It's not even getting to a place of stoicism. You say, I accept him being my president. And some people you can see when people say, oh yeah, he's my president, but he could have done better here. Or you can be skeptic. President, but I wish he would do this. But these people are in power unto death. So they're saying, no, he's not our president. So they're trying to manage their loss and their concerns at what we termed position 1, which is the envy, schizoid, paranoid position. It doesn't comport with reality, but it's useful. And I love it when I run into a kid who's completely nihilistic. You can't make me do that. You can't make me do that. Power unto death. I don't want to have a relationship with you. Melancholic grief. I've got laws, but you can't make me do anything. So, discursive nominalization is a term that we have developed in our program, and I term it as kind of like a starter kit to intimacy. It's like a fox intimacy. It's a false intimacy, but it's lovely. Kids love it. It's discursive. I can run around naming things. You think of the enjoyment of a 3-year-old, 4-year-old who's beginning to acquire speech, and he's running around naming things. This is the bathroom. This is this. And he doesn't know what its uses are or what its function is. It's in framing. It's not constitutive. It's just in framing. And so he runs around naming things. Again, it's the aesthetics, naming things, framing the house. In our protocols, we have the house that's framed out. That's aesthetics. I can live in a big house. I can make up that house. It can be anything I want it to become. It's aesthetics. And aesthetics is very shallow. It's about how you look. I'm glad I took off my suit. That was an example of aesthetics. I wanted to be, I don't care how I may look good, but bad. I didn't want to look good. But I was hot. So that's aesthetics. So you give it up.
Yeah.
Because I want to go to a moral space. I want to live in a house. And I want to have rules and regulations in order to take care of other people in that house. And so in our protocols, in our program, we talk about, in our moniker, when you look at our webpage, we've got the house that's framed, that's underdeveloped, then it becomes a home that's framed,
Yep.
where it can support life and agency. Yes? And that we need to put that in this teaching manual too, because I think the teaching aid would be very helpful to get that frame, And that would be a good thing
I
to
was just
have.
thinking the same thing. We should have it somewhere
Yeah.
in here. Because you refer to it a lot.
So, again, managing loss a lot of times leads us to a place of power unto death or nihilism, where you have created destruction or object use, and it's a very unfortunate place to be at. And that envy schizoid paranoid position 1. Then you go to position 2 for us, which is about the depressed position. It's the acknowledgement that you need to create intimacy in order to recover from loss. Again, position 1 has its uses. And when we talk about fragmentation, we'll talk about how it's used, okay? So we talk about fast track and slow track. As a construct, I think it's very helpful. In our protocols, we view position 1, which is the envy schizoid position, as fast track. It's a way for us to come up to speed, to get to learn things very quickly. It's a kid running around the house. It's discursive normalization, naming things very rapidly. Again, position 2 has to do with the depressive position. It's the idea that you're going to have to be intimate. That's slow track. When you create intimate spaces for another person, you have to slow down. You have to take time to listen, to consider what they're experiencing. So position 1 is bargaining. I'm not going to accept that. Nihilism, power unto death. The depressed position, slow track, is acceptance. Stoicism, I accept. Power versus intimacy. Power is a very important construct because you have to manage power in your intimate relationships with other people. And the Bible talks about it in many different and wonderful ways. Being equally yoked.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, John. Equally yoked.
Unequally yoked.
Unequally yoked. Thank you.
Because it says in the Bible not to be unequally yoked, meaning don't marry somebody outside of your faith or somebody who's so it's not like you because that you head you butt heads when if you're marrying 2 different religions. Well, how are you going to raise your child? Who's going to yeah, exactly. And that's what that was. Don't be unequally yoked.
Right.
Means.
Right, so that's an example of speech in transition. You go from ethic speech to eidostic, which is the culturally sanctioned speech. When I think of unequally yoked, I'm talking about where people have different power and relationships with each other.
One is well.
And they aren't willing to give the other person the agency to have a relationship with them, to have an intimate relationship with them.
Okay.
So in terms, I mean, it's not that you're right, I'm wrong. It's just that in language.
I was giving you the biblical.
But you know what I mean. But basically, you understand that the speech progresses.
Right.
And so basically, culturally, you know, in a primitive kind of world, having the idea that you married people who are similar to you, it makes sense. But eventually you get to a place of cosmopolitanism where you say, you know, it's about managing power and intimacy. So intimacy and power becomes very important. Again, when we talk about power, a lot of times we get two things conflated. We talk about natural power versus supernatural power. Again, the question is, what's the difference between natural power and supernatural power?
God.
Natural power is the kind of destructiveness we see in nature. The power of a shark, the power of a lion tearing apart a prey. Supernatural power is the power to give life.
Right.
It's what God entails. That's, to me, one is supernatural, is God's power, the power to create. The power to create an intimate space. Whereas human beings, when we think of power, we don't think of that. We think of it in terms of the power to destroy, to damage.
Yeah, that's supernatural power.
Well, natural is what we observe in nature. We look at the destructiveness in nature and we give value to that. And we think of that as power. Whereas the supernatural power of giving life and agency, for example, take a kid. The power of transforming a little bundle, a mewling, puking bundle of nerves to something that's loving and kind and sweet. That requires a lot of supernatural power and love, you know, to move to that place. So a lot of times the nature of power becomes very interesting. And a lot of times we confuse God's power with natural power. We talk about it. I don't know. I mean, this is just a presentation. You know what I'm saying? And there's a lot of way of thinking about it. I think of God's power as loving, caring, and kind, and creating intimate spaces.
Right.
No, fragmentation is something that we all have a tendency to do from time to time. Now, I had a kind of a cartoonish version of fragmentation where, you know, you're running and then your head fall off. Well, that's kind of cartoonish because people fragment even without falling apart.
Yeah.
It's dangerous.
Right. Fragmentation is the disintegration, collapse, or breakdown of norms of thought, practice, behavioral, and social relationship. It represents separation or the loss of intimacy and intimate spaces, which is provided in having relationships with others. Relationship means intimacy. You know, when those cops rolled up on that fellow in North Carolina and he had his hands to his side, they didn't have a relationship with that guy. He just represented dangerousness.
Or the story you just shared with us in your office.
Right, there's
Same
dangerousness. And so, again, it represents a loss of intimacy spaces, and not having a relationship with that power you're coming into contact with. Loss of intimacy presents with dangerousness implicit in what we experience as prosecutorial anxiety. We feel separate from the others. We feel overwhelmed. We feel dangerousness close by hand. Fragmentation as a choice favors simplicity of explanation and speed in trying to recover from loss. Again, the key is you're trying to recover from loss. And in fragmenting, you want to be able to recover from loss in a quick way. So you benefit from simplicity of explanation, and then you want to be able to solve the problem fast. And that's fragmentation. And you aren't willing to give time for things to evolve.
Right.
You know, and so it's the fast track. This fragmentation can lead to nihilistic and destructive behavior as informed by prosecutorial anxiety of self and the other that you're dealing with.
No.
If you fear for yourself and you believe that person is dangerous to you, then you can act in ways that are socially or culturally sanctioned to manage that loss.
Yeah, policemen shooting people.
So you met police shooting at each other. But you know, what's happened in this country in the last 10 years have been remarkable, because what you have now are a series of southern states enacting stand your ground laws. The National Rifle Association, you got a shooting in, was it in South Carolina?
Mhm.
Where kids in elementary school were shot?
Yeah, middle
The out of dangerousness,
Middle
you have
school.
guns everywhere,
One teacher,
gun on demand. So
kids.
there's this sense that there's dangerousness everywhere. And you got to have a gun to protect yourself.
But then you have your stand your ground laws and you have a gun and you're still being shot.
Well, but you see, stand your ground laws, well, that you're confused here. This is idostic speech. Stand your ground laws was not meant for black folks. They're implicitly dangerous. Did you know that?
Apparently.
Apparently. Okay. If you understand that, then maybe you won't feel so out of sorts. Now, the consequences of fragmentation. When fragmentation occurs, those intimate space of relationships become unusable or wasted space. They're not intimate any longer. They're viewed as inefficient or ineffective for fast or quick recovery from loss or from posture anxiety. So you want to act fast and quick to solve the problem immediately. Now, I was telling John and others a story that I experienced last week, where in the city that I'm working in, which is a small city, small municipality, we've got a local emergency room, psychiatric emergency room, and a fellow presented to the emergency room saying I was suicidal. The intake a clinician did an assessment and put him on a hold, 5150 hold. And so she then called the cops in this very small municipality to transport this fellow who she had put on a hold to the psyche yard. The cops rolled up, one cop rolled up, then a second cop rolled up, cop's car rolled up, and they approached the guy who was suicidal, who was concerned about his mom being sick. He had cataracts, he was off of his medication, he felt depressed, and he was saying, I wish I was dead. And so there was the imminent threat of him hurting himself or killing himself. And so the fourth cop car showed up, the fifth cop car, and this is a small town now, right? And so the cop, in a very dominating voice, says, you have to come with us to the emergency room right now. The guy said, I don't want to leave here. He said, you're on a 5154, you've got to come. Within 10, 15 minutes, that man was tased and he was on the ground in a pool of blood.
Oh.
And so they eventually, I don't know what happened, but they eventually got the fellow out of there and into the emergency room to be taken care of. And as I was coming back from lunch, I said, this is not going to go right. And so I walked into the emergency room, the space, and everybody was kind of distressed. You know, they were kind of unhappy about what transpired. And so we went back and forth. We were kind of processing what we had experienced. You know, this patient coming to our facility asking for help, but he ends up being bloodied on the ground. And so everybody said, what happened? What happened over here?
They're asking for help.
What happened? What happened? And I said, you know, you had fragmentation. That's what occurred. Because basically, you want to have a simple explanation of what was happening, and you want to act with speed. The cops were experiencing prosecutorial anxiety because they wanted to please, or they didn't want to get into trouble with their supervising officers. And they had over half of the police force at facility to transport one man to the emergency room. So they had to get him fast to the emergency room. And the guy was experiencing loss, and loss, to overcome loss, you have to have intimate spaces. It takes time. You have to come up with a way of dealing with your loss in a rational kind of way. And they were not going to allow him that space. And so within 10, 15 minutes, he was bloodied, tased, out. And so we were all shocked. And I thought, you know, I tend to talk about my program too much, but I that's what I do. I'm a psychiatrist, being and becoming. That's what I do. I don't know that it helps anybody to be quiet when there's a process that I utilize in my work as a psychiatrist based on my experiences in forensic hospitals, in police stations. I mean, I've been at Van Nuys Dispensary, LAPD, where I've seen tens and tens of people got tased multiple times.
In person?
Where I've had to take out the
probes.
probes out of their bodies. So I know what it's about. So, you know, I was not that traumatized by the experience, but I looked around me and these people were traumatized. I said, you have to look at the architecture of what just happened. I said, when this guy came into the emergency room area, he was having a diatribe. I have loss. His speech was about loss. I am lost. I'm worried about my mom. I'm worried about this. I'm worried about that. The cops rolled up. They were also in diatribal mode. Here, we're trying to get this guy to the hospital so we can get rid of him so we can go take care of the rest of the city. So it was diatribe on top of diatribe. You're going to come with us, sir. No. I don't want to go. You're going to come. Come here. But next thing you know, this man is being tased and got blood. And he's off to the emergency room to be taken care of. We got to prevent him from hurting himself.
So we'll hurt you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we'll hurt you.
So I said,
Yeah.
there's an architectural structure here that you have to look at. There's an architecture of loss and grief and recovery. And I said, when you have diatribe, you don't solve problems during a diatribe. By exchanging a diatribe with you, I don't solve anything. If I'm bigger than you are, you're going to be bloody, and that's it. It's done. So you have to go from a diatribe to a discussion. And even in the discussion, you're not solving any problem. In the discussion, you're trying to get a sense of what the person is experiencing. What are they worried about? And you begin to, and then you let people know. You say, well, we're worried that this guy may be a danger to himself, he may hurt himself. And if he hurts himself in our watch, then we're going to be reliable. The cops have the same kind of concerns. If this guy hurts himself, something else may happen here. So everybody's got this discussion about what may happen. But then they say, where are we? We're in this beautiful building. We've got food. We've got a place for people to sleep. And what's the rush? What is the rush? So we didn't have to go from diatribe to boop, boop, boop. We could have gone from a discussion to a dialogue. And a dialogue doesn't mean you solve the problem right away. The dialogue is you create accommodations. So the cops tell the person, hey, don't move, man. Just stay right here and listen. Clinician, give us a call in 2 or 3 hours when the guy's ready to go to the hospital. We'll be back. And they move out because nothing is happening. They move out. And so that didn't happen. Again, a dialogue doesn't necessarily solve your problem, but it gives you a chance to create accommodation based on a relationship with that person.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing that person as being someone in stress and in distress. And so that is what we talk about, the importance of recognizing prosecutorial anxiety versus depressive anxiety. The depressive anxiety is that the cops now saying, okay, I'm going to have to come back because you're going to have to work on this patient who is still struggling. That's a depressive relationship.
Yeah.
But it helps you to manage your prosecutorial anxiety. You say, we can have a depressive relationship here because I may have to come back, you may have to call me, I may have to come back later, but hey, as long as I'm not having a prosecutorial anxiety because I'm not upset that my boss may get upset with me, this guy's not going to harm himself, so we're going to be okay. So depressive anxiety helps you to manage your prosecutorial anxiety. And it's because you have a relationship with that person where there's intimacy. And that intimacy is based on language and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Resiliency. With fragmentation, resiliency is lost. Fragmentation results in reduced ability to act intentionally with the power of recovery in being and becoming. I'm not being what I'm supposed to be. I'm not becoming something else. Now, choice is informed by prosecutorial anxiety. And you have what I term anoetic fragmentation, meaning it's on thinking, you're just fragmenting, and you're trying to manage your loss as quickly as you possibly can. And there's some significant ramifications of doing such. Now, anoetic fragmentation, you have loss of transactional agency. Now, transactional agency is your ability to interact with other people and create a relationship. Once you lose that, you lose the intimacy of relationships. And so as a result, you end up in a place where there's a lot of violence, death, and destruction. Okay. Now, projective identification is a very powerful kind of a construct and concept. But projective identification is the power to effect change in others. Now relies almost exclusively on power unto death and the mastery of the other person. And it's again informed by choice, your prosecutorial anxiety, and the assignment of dangerousness. So those cops looked at that black fellow and they saw him as dangerous. And they figured that they had a good shot at him and they could kill him. Dangerousness. Donald Trump. American black communities are the worst things in America. They're like living in Afghanistan. You walk the street, you could be shot. There's the implied dangerousness. So if the cop shoots you, so what? We now understand that this fellow who was shot, who had a traumatic brain injury, his wife had a restraining order, and they're publicizing that. When they shot Tamir Rice, the first thing they looked for was the fact that his father had an arrest record. Dangerousness. Black bodies are dangerous. Therefore, they can be killed. They can be damaged. They can be destroyed because based on my sense of prosecutorial anxiety. So when commentators look at Donald Trump's statement and the implicit application to this community of dangerousness, he is giving justification for the fragmentation and the destruction of black bodies. Based on this assessment, where there's just prosecutorial anxiety, there's no depressive anxiety of creating a community and a relationship with other people. So you just have death and mastery to bind one's prosecutorial anxiety. Okay, power unto death. It's the conflating and identifying with the destructiveness of nature or nature's destructive power as the power you seek, which has immediate utility and informs your choice. And it's permitted based on your assessment of the rightness of what you're supposed to be doing, the rightness of your action. The cops, he had marijuana, and he says he didn't know that. The cops didn't know he had marijuana in his system, but he assumed it. This little boy, Timmy Rice, he looked like an adult. He looked like a predator. He was sitting on a playground with a toy gun in his hands. But there's this projection of dangerousness. It's ethic speech gone amok. It's the labeling of people as being dangerous in a kind of a Fox, intimate kind of way. It makes sense. It's discursive normalization. It gives you a sense that, he is the other. He's Obama being the other. He's not an American. He's a Muslim. That's ethic speech. Huh?
Our boys are men, but their boys are children. So they treat our boys as men.
Dangerous men.
Dangerous men.
Anyway, supernatural power is not the same as natural power. Supernatural power is the power of intimate spaces to give life and agency and to survive loss. It requires resiliency and patience, which time and rational choice affords. The slow track or the depressed position is about intimacy and elaborating intimate space with each other. Resiliency is the power or ability to return to the original or similar form or position after being bent, compressed, stressed, or injured. It is to rebound to a form with similar utility and functionality as the form before. It's being and becoming. So resiliency is a very important construct in managing one's sometimes tendency to fragment, to make quick decisions about people and to act very quickly to solve a problem. And not being aware that time sometimes gives you that opportunity also. The one thing that's interesting about our program, I just wanted to make a look at it. We look at the essential architectural loss as grief, the essential architectural loss in grief, the importance of choice and freedom. Choice. The choice to even say that God doesn't exist. That's part of the choice that you have. It's rational choice. Eventually, if you live long enough and you have a relationship with people, you realize God does exist, and basically you just got to give yourself enough time to get to that space. So, again, human resiliency requires the constitutive power of language to create intimate spaces in being and becoming. Again, language can be in framing or it can be constitutive. It can give meaning. I always think of constitutive language as expressed by a guy like Muhammad Ali. We talk about float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. That's constitutive speech. We knows what to float like a butterfly, to sting like a bee mean. It has constitutive meaning. It's not about bees. It's not about being stung.
A little bit like how about floating.
And then the other one is, I'm going to do a rope-a-dope. We know what rope-a-dope. We do rope-a-dope even when we're not even boxing. I'm just going to take it. I'm going to be stoic. I'm going to take you beating up on me. But then, boy, when I'm ready, I'm going to bounce back. That's constitutive speech. In any event, so speech is very important in creating that resiliency we need as human beings. Again, recovery is about being and becoming. Remember that all of our action is informed by choice, and sometimes the choices we have are stupid choices of eidetic speech. Obama was a Muslim. That's etic. It's naming stuff in a random, meaningless kind of way. But for some people, it's motivating. Power unto death. It gives them a sense of their own power.
Right.
Again, relationships are important because it informs choices. As many relationships as you have, it helps you to inform your choice. So when we, in our protocols and the loss and grief diagram, we talk about the importance of practicing. We talk about there are two ways to manage loss and grief. One is by the cognitive component, bargaining versus acceptance. But when we talk about practicing, we notice that we bring our transactional agency, and we have reciprocal relationships. First with ourselves, we take care of ourselves. Then we have relationships with our mates, our friends, with our work, our school, with our community, with our culture, with our hobbies, our interests, and finally with our God, our spirituality. And each of that informs us in terms of relationships in order to manage and to create those intimate spaces we need in order to recover. And so again, this talk was again on the importance of fragmenting, and just to understand the structure of fragmentation. And it's very common what we're witnessing in the community. And I don't know how we're going to do it, but in the future we're going to have video tape of hopefully of some of these events.
Like the one I sent you.
Yeah, but I didn't incorporate it into my. I should have incorporated it into my PowerPoint, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
I could, so I have to learn how to do that.
It's
That
actually-
way,
It'll play the video.
Well,
And it's on your YouTube channel now.
okay, so I'm going to have to learn how to do it to incorporate it into my presentation so I can present it
Okay.
here. So that was it. So what do you guys think? Let's go back to some of the
Questions as far as prosecutorial and depressive anxiety.
No, I mean again, this is a teaching protocol, and we are in the process of creating content, and in terms of writing a book on loss and grief. And so, in terms of our program, we had a series of framing questions, if you will. Prosecutorial anxiety. Can you give me an example of prosecutorial anxiety?
Yeah. Somebody, okay, in the way of an officer, if he's had a bad day or he just feels that he feels threatened by the person he's pulling over, then he feels that he can pull out his gun and intimidate the person.
Well, prosecutorial anxiety, again, there are two types of anxiety we experience as human beings.
Right.
Melanie Klein. There's prosecutorial anxiety and depressive anxiety. There are lots of different frames, but this is the one that I really like and I've adopted to our program here. Prosecutorial anxiety, I liken to walking in the wild, in the woods, and you see a tiger coming towards you. That's prosecutorial anxiety.
You automatically have this.
And you can then fill in the blanks, and you can use constitutive language to describe all the other things that you're fearful of. For me, prosecutorial anxiety is getting older, and getting older in a place without intimacy. I can't afford to get old in a place without intimacy. So for me, on a personal level, that to me is the worst kind of prosecutorial anxiety that I, in my personal life, I'm experiencing. Other people experience different things. A police officer experiences prosecutorial anxiety in the fear that he goes out in the community and he's afraid that he may not go home to his family.
But I get anxiety when the police pull up behind me.
So you feel
because I don't know what's going to happen.
So that's prosecutorial anxiety. It's like that lion coming at you.
Yeah, and your heart drops and you're just, okay, what happens next? And even if I say, sir, and I do everything the right way, it could still end badly.
Yeah, and so that's why Black Lives Matter. It's not that other lives doesn't matter. It's just that given prosecutorial anxiety in the history of this country, and that's what we're going to talk about in our next lecture series it's on dangerousness and assessing dangerousness. After the slaves were freed,
That's when they became the criminals, the rapists, the people that were feared. Once we weren't under their thumb, now we're the ones that are all of a sudden the subject of all this.
well, this is as American as apple pie. In the Reconstruction era, President Johnson was trying to bring the southern states back into the Union, and he had a tete-a-tete with the Republic. The Republicans had a tete-a-tete with the Democrats, and so they went on for like about maybe 10 years or so, where they went back and forth, where they were trying to empower the blacks who were recently freed from slavery. And so you had black senators, black congresspeople in the South. And eventually, the South just got tired and they said, "Man, you guys go and do what you've got to do." So Jim Crow came alive and the black codes came alive. And that social control was facilitated by dangerousness,
I think that so
this concept of dangerousness.
when the original role of police is to
Protect and serve.
To govern black people.
is to govern or keep under control fractious, unruly people, which were black people in their opinion. So what they did was they punished them however they saw fit. And I think that like these days or still there's an undercurrent of that unspoken philosophy for that.
And they're doing.
Basically they're like a gang that still continue to this day. Like I said, they have an undercurrent of that unspoken, way of things. It's just like it's basically like their unspoken job description. So I think that like since they do view black people as dangerous,
We're
they
the
have
ones.
a constant fear of a loss of power, and that's where when they have that, that's how things get escalated. That's what I see.
Yeah.
So like now with TV and everything, like we have back then in the 1800s, 1600s, you could make an example of a black person by doing what, whatever.
Killing him?
Killing them, right? So these days you have
Publicizing it.
you can publicize it, make an example out of this person, retain control or maintain control.
You're invoking that fear.
Yeah, when they wrote the Constitution, the Second Amendment was a very interesting amendment, and it was a compromise which allowed the creation of militias initially to inform and to protect property rights, and the property rights that they wanted to protect were runaway slaves. So the initial policing powers were to give the state militias the power to go after runaway slaves. So that's the start of the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, a well-regulated militia, and so that was a compromise. And so the history of the Second Amendment is really interesting stuff. But with the end of the Civil War and the need to maintain white privilege. And again, white privilege is kind of a pejorative, but there are black people and other people who benefit from white privilege, because all white privilege is that the majority of people are comforted by the system, and that's what nations do. That's what governments do. They're supposed to protect the property rights and rights of citizens. But the problem was that a series of America is an amazing country because in the middle of slavery, there were black people who were free, but their constitutional rights were not being observed. I mean, the term slave is really about Slavs. And back in the day, in the old Roman Empire or post-Roman Empire, the slaves were Slavic people who were enslaved. And they weren't blacks; they were white folks. But these white folks, eventually could run away and mix into whatever population they were involved in. So, the American slavery took on a totally different hue and complexity because it became race based, and it affected the polity, the governmental system. So it became very complex. So you had a series of black codes and restrictions, Jim Crow laws, and so forth and so on that that came through.
Natural power.
No, it's very natural power. So the ability to lynch black folks. I mean, it's just amazing. You know, one of the, you know what the Green Journal is?
No.
I think between 1936 and 1966, it was published somewhere in the North where blacks would subscribe to this journal and they'll tell blacks how to survive transiting as they go south. They tell them what towns not to go into, what towns to avoid.
The green tree.
Wow.
It was a green book. It was a green book. But anyway,
Wow.
from 1936 to 1966, they had this thing published because in America they had over 10,000 municipalities that were called sundown towns.
Oh yeah, you better be in before dark.
And Glendale in California is one of them. Levittown is
Montana,
one.
I think.
Maybe I don't know. But in any event, you had these restrictive covenants and towns whereby if you were black or sometimes Jewish or whatever, but blacks and Hispanic, you couldn't be there after a certain time. And who enforced these laws?
Police.
The police. And so every now and then the policeman had to, in enforcing these laws, they sometimes end up killing some black person.
Right.
And that was just part of doing business. And so that was, that's what the deal is. Lynching blacks
It was
was very common. It's very, very, very. So poor police officers. I mean, look, 99.9% of these guys are probably good, decent people, but I don't think they understand their history of police power and the role of prosecutorial anxiety and the importance of assuming depressive anxiety in doing community policing, where you're part of the community, where you care about the people in the community. And that's the best model for policing. Because if you don't do that, you're not really policing anybody. If you're just damaging and destroying and killing people, it's not. So that's prosecutorial anxiety versus depressive anxiety. And so fragmentation is again, it's trying to solve a problem of loss very quickly based on limited information. Fragmentation, you're trying to solve a problem with limited information and you're trying to do it very quickly. Our protocols came about because I was listening to the BBC broadcast in 2009 and they were highlighting the story of a white woman who, once Obama became president, went to her sickbed. She was profoundly sick that this black man had become president. And she was laying on her bed, and then one day she was looking at Fox News, and the Fox News said, he was born in Kenya. And came alive. And no, so she said, so she got up out of her bed, her sick bed, and she joined a tea party. And so that's ethics means. It was confirmational bias. You accept stuff
That you want
to believe. It's a choice. It's a choice. And so this is some very difficult stuff. And so you have to understand your history and understand how you create intimate spaces and communities to take care of people in those communities. So resiliency is a very important construct. It's the idea of being and becoming, the power of being and the power of becoming. And resiliency is you get resiliency by practicing, right?
Mhm.
If you want to be a great athlete, what you got to do? You got to run. You got to run. You got to practice. Resiliency is being kind, being decent, being professional. I always give the example of my history as a medical doctor, as a resident physician. As a resident physician, I sort of knew that if you came into my purview as a patient and you were fat and overweight and you had a lot of problems, you could be dead the next day. And they had all sorts of explanations why you could be dead. Because that's prosecutorial anxiety. I could have a bad day and you're dead. The problem in my training was that we weren't allowed to have bad days.
Yeah.
We weren't allowed to have D days. We had to bring our A game every game. Because the next day, at morbidity and mortality rounds, we had to explain, why did this patient die? What did you do? If the patient was so sick, why didn't you get him to the ICU? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you call for that help? There was no explanation. You couldn't hide under prosecutorial anxiety. They don't want to hear it. It was not allowed. So you lived. Because I didn't want to explain to my supervisors why I had a bad day. Because they weren't going to tolerate it. And I knew they weren't going to tolerate it. That's my culture. But guess what? I mean, if you come into my emergency room area and you were a difficult person or difficult whatever, things could happen to you, you know. And the thing that protected you was because of the structure of the program. I did my training in New York, and one of the surgical programs, the clinical staff decided that some of their residents had to also rotate in the nicer neighborhoods. Because if you did all your training in bad neighborhoods, you develop bad habits. You develop bad habits. And for the most part, you know, people would survive. But if you were not bringing your A game and you were allowed to bring your C and D game, sometimes people die. And sometimes so-called people who are valued die. And so they made a decision that if you were a surgical resident, you had to rotate not in only through the bad neighborhoods where it was knife and gun club and you can do whatever you want to do in your terms of your training, but you had to rotate through neighborhoods also where you had to be concerned about the people and providing good care because it was about practicing, developing good skills. And one of the things that those surgical residents understood is that you always bring your A game. I don't care what the patient looks like. If we weren't going to permit it, you're not permitted to have a C or a D game day. That was very important. So that's resiliency. Power. I mean, people always conflate natural and supernatural power. People are all excited about power, the aesthetics of power. I have money, I can buy anything, I can do anything. You know, I can do any damn thing I want. And I can destroy you, I can damage you. The funny thing about that kind of power is that everybody can assume it. Even the simplest person can assume that power. All they have to do is say, no, I'm not going to accept it. I'm not going to accept you or your relationship with me. And I will destroy you. That's nihilism. And that's the power of nihilism. Projective identification. So you say, I am nothing. Well, guess what? You're nothing too. Boom. So that's natural power. And so natural power can be assumed by anyone. Supernatural power is tougher. It's a slow track. It's about creating intimate spaces where you take care of other people. You're taking care of that mule and pukey little baby so they can grow up and become a wonderful human being. It's being fair and honest and just to the people around you. It's about moral sentiment, doing the right thing because it makes you feel good. Rational choice, right? Yeah. So those are the four framing questions.
Okay, now you mentioned natural power, and I'm relating that to being confronted by a law officer, and you know that you're being violated, your rights are being violated, and you speak to his power. And does his power become superpower? Nihilistic once you display your human power to stand up for yourself, as far as to speak against his prosecutorial anxiety.
Well, you know,
is that what causes a lot of conflict? Because a lot of times when you question just the act of being pulled over, they get offended by it, and they feel
They don't want you questioning their authority.
Is that a correlation between power, natural power, and a nihilistic power? Because when you become a nihilist, you're resisting the power, right? And unto death. Power unto death.
You see, power unto death means you don't want to go to the third level, which is to have a relationship.
Yeah.
Having a relationship is going to a moral space.
Yeah. And that's what the police do. They go to a nihilistic
They don't go to a relationship with you.
They go to a relationship. Yes.
They just want power unto death.
Yeah.
It's how and all they have in that relationship, power unto death is about having prosecutorial anxiety.
Yeah.
We back away from prosecutorial anxiety and subsume depressive anxiety because we create intimate spaces with each other in order to survive and grow and thrive. So when you're in a situation where somebody's at you and they're having a diatribe, it's all about prosecutorial anxiety. Diatribe is about prosecutorial anxiety. they're not listening to what you gotta say.
Exactly, and that's what usually happens.
And that they're not listening to what you gotta say. So at some point, you realize you're in a diatribe with these officers.
And that's what happened with North Carolina when you see the
You're a
lady,
diatribe.
lady was trying to communicate with the officers, don't kill him.
That's right.
You
It's a
know,
diatribe.
and
It's a
when-
You know, they
diatribe.
blacked her out.
It's a diatribe.
They blacked her out.
A discussion would have been, ma'am, is this your husband?
Exactly. De-escalated.
Yeah, this de-escalation.
Communication.
They
or-
didn't want to de-escalate because they were
relationship.
fragmenting. They had to have a simple explanation. He's a black guy. He's dangerous. We have to solve this problem fast, or we have to kill him.
And that's fragmentation.
That's fragmentation.
Fragmentation. You know, they were looking for a solution.
It's power unto death.
Power to that.
He's dangerous,
And that's
and I can kill him.
Annihilism.
Right. It's all power.
All power.
It's all power. But you see, the thing about that is that is fungible.
Yeah.
Because the simplest guy with a gun, terrorist, can all of a sudden decide that your life don't mean damn thing anything too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's the power of nihilism. Because they're also assuming power, the power of death,
Mm-hmm.
without having a relationship with you. You know, so prosecutorial anxiety can come up in any relationship that is not managed properly. And you realize that you have to go from power unto death, which is kind of aesthetic and kind of silly,
Mhm.
to having a relationship. Having a relationship is really tough.
Yeah.
Assuming depressive anxiety is very tough.
Yeah, but it starts with communication.
But it starts with communication. You have to talk. So you have to go from a diatribe to a discussion,
Mm-hmm.
then to a dialogue where you can solve problems.
Yeah.
You know, and so sometimes you just have to be quiet and still and don't act.
And that's something I think they lack.
And then
because
and speak to the
they never
officer.
looking for an understanding when they get to a scene, just like you said in your example with the guy, he was in a suicidal mode. You know, instead of trying to get an understanding, you know, they were just there to enforce an order.
Quickly.
You know,
Yeah.
And they were
Yeah.
quickly, they were
Comfort
experienced
him
possibly, yeah.
and
instead of looking for
build that rapport is
an
what I would
understanding,
think.
try to get understanding that.
Right. So
Not
they never
even
so
until
basically you have to actually think, like we talk about that shield, you
Yeah.
have to actually say, you know, I'm gonna go from diatribe
Yeah, yeah,
intentionally.
and yeah,
I'm going from a diatribe to a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Who are you? What kind of problems are you having?
Yeah.
Sir, I am concerned you have a gun and you may use that gun to shoot me.
Yeah.
I do it all the time. Sir, do
Yeah.
you want to hurt yourself? Do you want to kill yourself?
Mm-hmm.
That's a discussion.
Yeah.
Why do you need a gun? Ma'am, is that your husband? I
Yeah.
want you to take that gun and I want to lift it up the air. If he has a gun, take that gun from him and put it up the hair. Just grab it by the bar and put it over your head.
Exactly.
And so if you're looking at him, he's got traumatic brain injury.
Yeah.
You use the agency of his wife,
Exactly.
who's communicating with you.
Exactly.
You can have a discussion with her. He's not talking because he's.
Right.
He's
They're putting-
overwhelmed.
They're
Yeah,
putting him on
yeah,
the defensive. If he has
So this is a lack of training
Exactly.
because
Exactly.
basically these people believe that based on the dangerousness, we can go shoot these guys.
Yeah.
It really bothers me that every time there's a
Systemic.
shooting,
It's just racism.
they're
People are
always
afraid.
looking for some sort of an excuse, either a past
Victimizing
criminal
victim.
record, use of marijuana,
Exactly.
restraining order. With Timmy Rice, where his daddy was arrested.
Yeah, but this
but
little
he
kid was in the
not
park.
with them at the park.
Yeah,
But it doesn't matter.
yeah, 9, 10
He was a black kid who wasn't parented at home.
So that's why he was at the park.
Right.
With
And
his
so
toy
that-
gun like most kids get from the ice cream truck.
Right, but
After-
there's no. It's ethic speech.
It's
It
no
doesn't make any
rationalization to it,
sense.
no rationalization.
It's ethic
Right.
speech. This parliament, it means nothing.
What I've done at least a handful of times,
Mhm.
because of course, me being who I am, I of course have been in that situation, and I actually experienced that with you outside of your home.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You basically have to kind of outsmart them by giving them power. So that essentially gives
Make
you
them
the
feel
power.
like they're in control.
I've gotten out of potentially bad situations multiple times by doing that.
Me too. I'm extremely
For-
nice and sir.
For example, you came outside and you were kind of
Confrontational. I was.
She was, but what I did was, I remember him asking me. He's like, "I could take you to jail right now,"
He did say that.
and then I just basically, "Let's go, sit on the curb, sit down." You have to outsmart them because the minute they feel like they're losing a little bit of control, or things might get a little bit out of hand, that's when they advance.
They're scared. It's all prostitute anxiety.
Yeah, exactly.
So the best
All
way to
possible.
handle it is just to outsmart them by handing them the power and allowing it to take place however they want it to.
You know,
Because you can't win that battle.
Not looking the way you do.
You know, the thing about it, I've been in certain
Not getting
situations,
taller,
but
right?
I use the OP defense. Hi, Officer Smith. My God, you look like Jimmy Smith. Is he your brother?
Yeah. Yeah, deflate, de-escalate the.
I went from a
Yeah,
diatribe where
yeah.
it's dangerous. My God, you look just like Jimmy Smith. Is he your brother?
Brought some humor to the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know who the hell Jimmy Smith is.
He's an actor.
You know, but we're going to be going from a
I thought it was
diatribe where it's
Pinocchio's
dangerousness,
Yeah.
or say, officer, you know where I can find a good barbecue joint here? The guy says, no, let's get out of here, man.
Yeah,
You're not supposed to be here. You're nut. So you have to play these little stupid games. No, you know, I heard a story once that really affected me. It was told to me by one of my colleagues. She said that she had a relative. He was a very handsome guy. He was a high-powered lawyer, and he was in San Francisco. And he was stopped. He was mugged. He was being mugged by a criminal. And the guy said, "Man, give me your wallet. Give me this." And so the guy said, "Man, you want this? Yeah.
Take this, you
Take
pretty
it.
motherfucker.
What you step on my life for, man?" I told you that story also. He said, "Oh, you can have this, you can have that," and he was just very dismissive of the guy.
Took his power from him.
And so what happened was the guy said, "You pretty motherfucker." Boom, boom. This is how pretty you are now, motherfucker. He blew his ear off.
He felt he had lost
Named
control with the,
Named him.
yeah.
So, because he was saying, like, you can take it and go, man.
It doesn't
It
matter.
doesn't matter to me. I'm a rich guy.
People don't like to lose comfort encounters.
Yeah.
People don't like to walk away from an encounter having lost.
But you see the thing
That's
about
basically
that's it. But I took that story and I says, let me see if I can reframe this story. A guy's holding me up and he's taking all my stuff. I said, "Man, okay, here you go." I said, and then all of a sudden I begin having a discussion. I said, "Man,
My driver's license.
can I?"
Sorry. Sorry.
He's heard this many times.
I'm giving him my wallet. And I say, "Hey, man, look." I said, "Listen, guy, you can have the money, but can I at least have my driver's license, man? I got to get to work." You know. And the minute the guy says, "Okay, here's your license back," guess what he's telling me? "You can live. I just want the money." Because he says all of a sudden, "I know what it's like to be in a DMV, man."
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
So,
And
so
so-
he's empathizing with you, basically.
No, basically you're going from a diatribe where you have a dangerous situation to a discussion where you say, "I accept that you're going to take my money, but can I have my license?"
In your life.
And I'm not asking for my life.
Yeah.
I just said I just want my
Yeah,
license,
your
man.
It says there's gonna
Because
be
I
a
have to go to
tomorrow.
work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to DMV, bro.
Yeah.
When you did that, you basically humanized them.
Right. And he says, "Okay," because now he's doing me a favor. We're now going from a diatribe to a discussion to a dialogue. "Okay, man, here's your license. Bye." So we went from a diatribe to a discussion to a dialogue. And in the dialogue, everybody decides you're going to get your license. Forget about your life. You're going to have your license. Of course, implicit in that is what? You're going to live.
Survival.
Yeah.
As opposed to the guy saying, "You can have this, man. I'm not having a discussion with you. You're just a piece of shit, man." Guy said, "Oh, pretty motherfucker. Let's see how pretty you are now."
Yeah, he kept power, so he didn't fragment or
Right.
become a nihilistic.
Right. It's power unto death. It's about how you deal with power. He had power over that man,
Mhm.
but the power that he had over him was the power to damage him and destroy him. And human beings get off on that kind of power.
Oh, yeah.
It's not moral. It's not ethic. The power. Any other concerns, questions?
The question was that why is it now that everybody seems to be like I was telling you, either jumping to a conclusion, jumping to to action quickly instead of doing just what you've been saying, getting into a discussion. I mean, it seems like it's not just with the police departments and stuff like that, but it seems like it's a lot of other things too.
It's the people, because I think it's the police, and then it's also just us. general
Society in
citizens,
general,
Because some
society in
people like they can't, they're not taking things step by step. Like those that act impulsively, like they're gonna automatically just assume like just like the I can't remember the other guy that got shot with the girlfriend in the car, where she before he got, the police officer was already on the defense. She was already expecting him to, like, we already expect the worst. It's like on both ends.
She had her camera ready.
She was videotaping it because she's everybody, and it seems like now it's almost like every week.
As soon as you see
It's
the police,
something. I see the one with the guy walking with his hands up.
I'm gonna give you an
towards the car, and it's
explanation.
like,
I'm going
I
to give you
don't
an
know.
explanation that you may accept or not accept. When I was growing up in Brooklyn, and I was listening to the Four Tops and those singers, and you listen to their music, these people were speaking to you. They were talking.
Social
they were-
commentary.
It was social
Yeah.
commentary.
It's awesome.
It was about community.
Just imagine.
It is about relationships.
Soundtrack to the.
It's about. But when you listen to the modern, it's all about beat and the aesthetics.
Yeah.
Push it. Hey, hey,
Yeah.
hey.
Yeah.
Hey, hey! You listen to the Isley Brothers' Harvest for the World.
Yeah.
Between the sheets.
Between the Sheets. Even Between the Sheets, Harvest for the
World
World.
House of the World.
It's literal. It has meaning.
Stevie Wonder.
Stevie
Higher
Wonder.
Grounds.
High ground.
Keep
When you
songs
listen,
that
when you
keep
listen
alive,
to music
songs
right
that
now,
keep alive.
I'm answering your question in a very roundabout
Yeah.
way. It's speech. It's speech about intimate spaces. People don't create intimate spaces
anymore.
You know,
Right.
basically, we talk about Annie's song. We talk about that
Right.
song, how beautiful it is.
Oh yeah, the sun come out tomorrow. Yeah.
Basically, most people don't have the patience to listen. It's because it's not all about them.
Yeah.
It's all about them and what they are, and it's about themselves.
Do you think it's the pendulum going to swing back to that type of social consciousness to where we are going to be more cognizant
Way back
of each
now,
other?
being
But that's,
socially
I think
conscious?
it plays to people, like divorce rates, everything, people's relationships, the way young people are, as far as like even their hope for like a healthy relationship. It seems like all of that is like falling apart socially.
I have something to say to this, and it's to what he asked as well. So I've always thought this. So I think that I thought about this because of video games originally. Like when you're a kid, you play video games, it's violent, and there's a lot going on. So, and then now we have the news, we have TV, we have the TV shows, everything that we're taught and told
Facebook.
how things could be or how we should behave. And now we've got social media, and everything is just so exacerbated. So I think that situations, this is where your question comes in, situations are basically outlets for all we've learned through all these modes.
External
Right.
activity that we
So
participate
like
in.
when we watch a
All
video
these
game, and
killings.
it's like a first-person shooter. When we get in an actual situation like that, like, okay, here's where I can use what I learned. And in this generation, in these times, it's basically so much of it. And of course, now the tensions and everything, these is also things that we're taking in. So these situations, like I guess the police officers, it's like, okay, now I have to react based on what I've learned on,
What you've been
what's
trained.
going
yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But,
So
but a lot of that is, this is a very complex issue. You have to understand that North Carolina is ground zero, and there are so many things that are happening in that state. And I label it revanchist conservatism. So North Carolina is an open carry gun state.
Mm-hmm.
You can have a gun legally, but not if you're black.
No.
It's a state where you have stand your ground laws in place.
Not if you got
It's a state where they beginning to degrade the democracy by creating all sorts of laws to take away the voting rights of
The
black
rights,
folks.
yeah.
It's a state where they try to co-opt white evangelics by creating bathroom laws that victimize the LGBT community. It's where revanchist conservatives co-opt the organs of government to do damage to certain specific people in order to maintain power.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a very deep, nasty thing. And so we are in a very difficult situation because most of the things that we're engaged in is ethic kind of speech. Ethic. Meaning just random labeling things. You ever speak with people, they don't even make sense half the time.
Yeah.
They don't make sense.
No.
They really don't. Because they have no value, they have no moral standing, they have no ethical standing. You can't predict what they're going to do next. And for them, their view is that what you see is all that there is. Whereas if you're a mature person and you have a kind of an understanding of language and the intimacy of language, then you know that there's a lot more to it than that. So to me, so I'm always amazed. Some people. I'm always, to me, I'm a natural comedian. I said, it's a couple's getting together and they're about to make love. They said, well, did you get the butter? I got the butter. So, did you get the whipped cream? That's whipped cream. Did you get the cherries? I said, what are you trying to do? You trying to make love or bake a cake?
Both.
I mean, what is the magic in that?
Yeah.
The magic, to me, if two people are intimate, you need a nice bed with a sheet and your imagination. Maybe a little bit of olive oil. But that's it.
You don't need the cherries.
You don't need the cherries. You don't need the whipped cream. You don't need the butter. Why are you hiding your face, young lady? But it's where we are as a society. We try to make things way too complex. It's ethics stuff. It makes no sense.
So then, what's the process to get, even the police departments to go from just straight dialogue to conversation?
Well, I mean, there's a process. If you're having a dialogue, you're having a conversation. You're going from diatribe to discussion to a dialogue. So it's that progression, and it's about your social level of consciousness and just being smart, rational choice. Everything is about choice.
But do you think it's possible?
What is possible? What is possible?
Going like what he said, everything getting to something that's
For them to practice that process.
It's about training.
Exactly.
It's about training. Why is it that the police in New
hard.
Why is it that the police in New Jersey captured a terrorist and he survived?
After
After they shot him, and he was running down the
Do
street.
you think it's going to happen though?
It has to happen because it has to happen simply because
We're going to implode.
this is the point here. This is the point here. Historicism. It's kind of a Hegelian term, but the state is very important. Unlike what the revanchist conservatives tell you, governments are important.
So something horrible has to happen.
Well, no, not necessarily. But states are important. States are important. States are important. Government is important. I mean, if you read the Bible and you're religious, you realize that. Lynn, take care.
Thank you.
You're running late. Take care.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Thank you.
So, states become very important. Lynn sets it up for us. She gotta leave.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Good
Lynn.
night. Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye, Felicia.
So states become very important, and so it's how do you perfect government? I mean, I love Obama because basically he talks about creating a more perfect union. It's about responsibility and ethical spaces and intimate space we need to create for each other and to treat each other with respect and understanding. I mean, what else? What other choice do we have?
Yeah, we have. I mean, like I said, this country will implode if we don't.
But we're
Do
not gonna.
something to make it better.
Things are gonna improve because we have to.
Yeah.
Because there's no other solution, and this is not the worst of times. I mean, in this country, things used to be a lot worse.
Yeah.
Like this right now.
This conversation is long overdue. That's what
Yeah.
He should have this conversation back in the '60s and
Yeah.
'70s.
When I grew up in South America, and we love American music. As a matter of fact, in my conscious memory, I remember the day that Otis Redding died.
Oh, yeah.
Because Otis Redding was
Otis
coming
Redding,
to my part of the world. We were it was like waiting for Godot. I mean, we were just excited about Otis Redding coming.
Yeah.
I have been sitting with my parents listening to, and my mom in particular, listening to Brooke Benton, A Rainy Night in Georgia.
Yeah. But Ben, yeah.
You know, Otis Redding sitting in the dock of the bay.
Yeah.
They don't write music like that anymore because language is not etiquette anymore.
It's auto-tune.
It's
Auto-tune.
whatever it is. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
It's
But you know,
auto-tune.
the politics of A Rainy Night in Georgia. You've heard the song A Rainy Night in Georgia?
Yeah.
What's A Rainy Night in Georgia about?
Isn't that with the Pips and Gladys Knight?
No, Rainy Night in
Rainy
Georgia.
Night in
What is Brooke Benton? What is A Rainy Night in Georgia about?
It's raining all over the world. It's about depression and
A Rainy Night in Georgia.
yeah.
The guy couldn't find an accommodation.
Yeah. Okay.
He couldn't find a place to stay.
Yeah.
Because of prejudice and racism. And we know he was living in a modern city because the taxi drive was passing in the night.
Yeah. I gotta go revisit the lyrics on that. I grew up with that song.
You know, the truth of the matter is that I learned that stuff, that
Revisited it.
idostic speech, sitting in with my mom and her girlfriends as they combed, they pressed their hair, and they said, "Did you live there, Brooke Benton, in the Rainy Night in Georgia? Oh, that is about this, about this." What about black people being suffering and
Yeah.
racism? Sitting on the dock of the bay is about racism and finding freedom when you get to the Bay in San Francisco?
Yeah.
Really? That is art.
Yeah.
Mimesis. Anti-mimesis. Art imitating life, life imitating art. This is the height of Greek culture. And you know, you need to begin to teach this stuff and to think about it and to talk about it. You know, and so
But you have these artists that think that they're producing art. And it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
It's
These
just
so-called
getting
artists,
worse.
they think
Yeah.
that they're producing art. There's a
They're juggling nonsense.
there's a big artist right now that literally likens himself to Michael Jackson.
Oh, The Weeknd?
Yeah,
Oh.
but
He
that's
does.
what I think. Like I think they literally think that
I don't even know what he's talking
they're
about.
producing art because it's being consumed.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
the
because
beat is nice.
it's
The rhythm.
commercial. It's commercial.
that's aesthetics.
That's the thing.
That is that, you know, in my program here we have the aesthetic of that frame, that house.
'Cause
Nobody
it
can
looks
live
good.
there. It looks good.
Right.
You can change it up, you can knock it off, it's meaningless.
But he's not saying anything.
The problem is when you cross over that bridge and you have to live in that house and take care of the people in that house with you.
Uh-huh.
That's it.
That's where the rubber hits the road.
Right.
That's where you have to develop a moral space, an ethical space. You have to be responsible to each other. You know, and the speech has to parallel that. Most of our kids want to live in that framed house, you know, and live there all the time. They don't want to go into that, cross that bridge and begin living in a real home
Yeah.
with real responsibility.
They have
Mhm.
chores. They have
Foundation.
Right.
So that's the deal. That's the deal. So my program here, like I said, you know, it's about loss and grief. It is about what we're experiencing. You know, it's about ethopoiesis of language and the language to create those intimate spaces to help us to recover from loss and grief. And so tonight we talked about loss and grief, and we specifically looked at fragmentation and resiliency, and the importance of managing prosecutorial anxiety. And the only way you manage prosecutorial anxiety is by assuming depressive anxiety of having intimate relationship with each other. End.
Cool.
Work, man. Hey, John, this is the first time, man. I